How's it? So, I had a very cool weekend, Monday, and today, and life goes on. But what people don't seem to realize a lot about commentators that come on these platforms is that we do not have the backing and support of investigative journalists, private investigators, etc., etc., etc. People like me. Perhaps there are guys out there that have access to that. I have access to it, but I simply don't have the money to employ those types of professional fact checkers and I don't know, just experts on every level. So my information is based exactly on what your information is, what we can find on the World Wide Web and what we find statistically and accordingly. However, that having been said, I spend a large proportion of my time reading, particularly history, and I'm particularly interested in the history of South Africa, obviously, because I live here. And of course, during my time at school, you have to question the history that you were taught because the history was taught to you by people who were trying to push a certain narrative. It doesn't make that history untrue. It just means that it must be questioned. And the same goes for history around the world. You have to really dig into historical artifacts and action to figure out what really was going on, especially since as the world is changing at the rate it's changing, more and new interesting archaeological facts come out and a lot of history that people were not aware of come out. So I'll give you one of the most basic things that you're going to laugh, but one of the most basic things that I only found out in recent history is that someone like Karl Marx was Jewish. The guy that literally invented communism was Jewish. And I've since that time, when I say relatively recently, probably in the last 5 years, I found that out. And I've read intermittently certain portions of his work. Not a lot, because I'm not really too interested in communism. I've seen the results of communism around the world for me to have made a judgment call on what I think of it. But I've even read, what I have read in its entirety, cover to cover, is Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. I've also read Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, as well as other autobiographies that I come across. I'm a great follower of Douglas Murray, and I read a lot of his work, and I follow a lot of the center-right podcasts. Another guy that I enjoy because he doesn't stand on either side of the argument is Lex Friedman. He interviews a lot of very interesting people, from astrophysicists to bishops in the Roman Catholic Church. And I find, that very interesting in terms of who is prepared to speak to. And, you glean a lot of information from these types of one-on-one conversations. At the same time, I've done a lot of informal study on certain aspects of life. And right now I'm currently completing a degree in theological studies, obviously Christian theology. But as part of those studies, a large portion is based on counseling, which is what I do mainly. But then now in my third year, a lot of influence or a lot of attention has been given to world religions, the five main world religions that house the biggest religions in the world. And obviously, as part of Christian theology, we study the history of Israel from ancient times right through to where we're at now. And we also study in depth the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. From the times of the kings, the tribal wars that they had there, to the diaspora, to the return of the Jews to Israel, and, as it stands now. And so, I have a very good grasp of, how it all came to be, from the time of the Romans to the Ottoman Empire to the British occupation to the Second World War, the results of the Second World War, how Israel came to become a state, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I'm bringing all this to your attention is because last week I did a video, and there's a guy on there, and I'm quite willing to listen to and debate with him. But, to sit and type for hours and hours is really not my forte. And, immediately claiming that, pretty much that I'm an idiot and I'm uneducated and I've got no idea about what's going on. And this is a mistake many, many, many people make with many, many commentators, okay? So my primary problem with an individual like this is that they themselves do not air their points of view openly and honestly from their perspective. And second of all, to make a truth claim based on your perception of somebody, not really knowing, what level of education, IQ, intelligence, or background, or how much information this person has really worked through, and then just making a claim like, you're an idiot, or you're a fool, or you have no idea what's going on, because that individual doesn't agree with your perspective, or like in my case where I drew a parallel between what the ANC supports and, the history of Hamas and Iran and what they purport to support themselves, which is global terrorism. You can look at the Israel-Palestine conflict from any direction that you wish. You can look at it from the left, you can look at it from the right, you can look at it from the pro-Palestine mindset, you can look at it from the pro-Israel mindset. But, God Saad, on his podcast, as well as on Joe Rogan and other podcasts, who is a student of the political climate in Israel and has been for many years, has, stated on numerous occasions that since 9/11, that Islamic terrorist groups, fundamentally Palestine Liberation Organization, Hamas, Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, have been supported by Iran and have been responsible for over 47,000 terrorist attacks around the world in their fight for the freedom of Palestine. So, for me, that particular statistic, really speaks to the mindset of the people that are committing these terrorist attacks, because, they're blowing up Americans and they're blowing up the British and they're blowing up everyone around the world, because in their minds, these people support Israel. So they're killing innocent people around the world, claiming the moral high ground. And I posted on that video some of the stats in terms of the amount of times that Israel has been attacked since 1948, and it's staggering. It's staggering. And ultimately, what has ultimately happened is that Israel eventually, after October the 7th, 2023, has pretty much got to a place where they're tired of constantly living under the threat of attack from Gaza, which I read a stat not too long ago, were firing up to 300 rockets on some days out of Gaza into Israel, which of course prompted the creation of the Iron Dome, which shoots 99% of those rockets out of the sky. But that's not the point. The point is that they constantly have to protect themselves from these attacks. And on October the 7th, that was pretty much the last straw, and they walked into Gaza and they flattened it. And yes, there have been thousands of deaths. And yes, I really do feel for the children. And when I say children, people who are under combat age, so let's say 15 and below, 13 and below. But I have to say this, that I don't really feel for the women in Gaza. I've got to be honest, because many, many times the attackers in these terrorist attacks are women themselves. And, and I really also, have to make a judgment call on how do I feel about people being bombed and killed by soldiers that are, in this area. And I have to say, these people have had since 2007 to remove this Hamas regime. And not only have they not removed it, but they've supported it all the way. They've supported Hamas all the way in its terrorism motives against Israel. And whether you like it or whether you don't, and I'm going to repeat what I said last time, Israel is an internationally recognized state with borders. And you attacking an international, it's like if Lesotho were to attack South Africa constantly and consistently. If Lesotho decided that they were being occupied by us and they're going to war with us, and they started rocketing us and bombing Joburg and rocketing Durban and rocketing Bloemfontein, and intermittently over the last 18 years. And then a group of Basotho came across the border and slaughtered 1,500 South Africans and ran away with another 200. What do you think would be the appropriate response for South Africa against Lesotho if that were to have happened? We would be baying for their removal and destruction. It's as simple as that. And now this conflict, that exact thing has happened overseas, and Israel responded very, very strongly to that attack. And of course, people didn't expect that level of destruction. I didn't. I've got videos up on my Facebook page where I've said that, Israel needs to now tone it down. I've said it many times, because I see what's going on there, and I do feel for those kids, because my own grandkids, are Muslims, and I don't feel sorry for the kids because they're Muslims. What I'm trying to point out to you is that I understand the difference between right and wrong, and I don't believe that children should be involved or harmed in these types of conflicts. But the reality is that conflict was created by Hamas. And Hamas must bear the responsibility for all those deaths. It's as simple as that. And, going back into history and trying to decide who's right and who's wrong now, based on what happened in history, is nonsensical. It's nonsensical. It's like our own apartheid story here. We have this killings now in Reiger Park, And I know that people are now going to come on the bandwagon and say that the killings in Reiger Park over the weekend are P.W. Botha's fault. And because of the ghettos that were created and so on and so forth. And while I would agree that that would play a role in people's mindsets, you cannot hold people responsible from history for the actions of people today. They pulled out the guns, they killed the innocent people, they must bear the responsibility. It's as simple as that. And when you look at a situation like what's going on in a lot of these communities in South Africa, where it's people from within the communities themselves attacking their own communities, then the communities need to start questioning, how are we creating these types of people, and what is going on, and what are we doing that is creating this constant mindset of death? And it's the same in Gaza. That's where the problem lies. The problem lies in the radicalization and the terrorist mentality combined with a exceptionally violent theology that is creating the problem. And that needs to be looked at and worked towards solving. It's not just a simple question of who's right and who's wrong anymore. It's a question of who are we breeding and what are we breeding and what are we teaching our kids and what are we teaching our grandkids. And it's as simple as that. I've said for a long time that the solution in Israel is a two-state solution. However, there's only one side of that argument that's constantly preventing that two-state solution from occurring. Those that refuse to acknowledge the state of Israel there. They are the ones that are refusing to work towards this two-state solution. We have had 6 attempts at that, and every single time it's the Palestinian side that has fought against it and continued its terrorism. They want Israel gone, and it's just simply not going to happen. So it's either a two-state solution where everyone agrees to live in peace, or these wars are going to go on for generations to come. Amen. Have a lekker day, and I'll chat to you guys later. Cheers.